Okay, good evening. I'm Richard Waller, Executive Director of the University Museums at the University of Richmond. Thank you for joining us this evening for the opening of our exhibition, Janet Hamlin, Sketching Guantanamo, in the Laura Robbins Gallery of Design from Nature. In addition to her exhibition of drawings and sketchbooks in the museum, there is a concurrent exhibition of Janet's photographs taken at Guantanamo, and that is on view in the International Gallery in the Carol Weinstein International Center. Organized by the University Museums, the exhibition was curated by myself in close collaboration with the artist. We had a lot of fun picking the works, and it was very exciting. The exhibition is presented in cooperation with the university's School of Law and several academic departments and programs in the School of Arts and Sciences, including the departments of journalism, political science, history, rhetoric and communication studies, American Studies program, and international studies. The exhibition and programs are made possible with support from the university's Cultural Affairs Committee and the Dean's Office of the School of Arts and Sciences. I would like to take this opportunity to thank J.P. Jones from the Law School, Robert Hodiern from the Journalism Department, and Peter Smallwood from the Biology Department. You'll have to ask me for that connection later. For their very hard work in bringing together the additional programs we will be presenting or promoting in conjunction with Janet's exhibition. There's a flyer available, and I hope you will add a very simple, straightforward flyer. I hope you will pick this up either at a table outside or in the museum. And this lists 3 dates you need to remember: October 2nd, October 21st, and November 10th. And I'll have you look at the flyer for the particulars on those 3 programs, and we hope you will attend all 3. Now, for the backstory of how this exhibition came to be at our university museums. We have a law student, Malcolm Savage, studying here at Richmond, standing over here. During his first year here, Malcolm met with his advisor, Professor Jones, to discuss an independent study project on the hearing process, which led to a discussion of Malcolm's aunt, Janet Hamlin, and her incredible work as a courtroom sketch artist at Guantanamo. This quickly led to JP contacting Mike Spears, who was then chair of the journalism department, and as you've guessed, that quickly led to me and the university museums. One look at her work, and you understand the importance of what she is doing at Guantanamo. The outcome is that tonight you will see Janet's remarkable drawings and hear her talk about the art and her work at the commissions. I think this interesting line of connections could only happen at a university like ours, and I'm really pleased that we're able to bring her work to your attention. We are delighted that Malcolm has agreed to introduce his aunt for us tonight. He is a merit scholar in his 2nd year of studies in our law school. Next month, on behalf of the National Institute for Military Justice, Malcolm will witness and report on a week of Military Commission 9/11 hearings at Guantanamo Bay. Following Janet's lecture, if we have time, we will take a few questions here, and then please join us for the reception and to see the exhibition. And we are providing shuttle service this evening for your convenience to get down to the museum. I would like to now turn the program over to Malcolm Savage.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. It's kind of wild to see so many people here. I was talking to Janet right before this started about what I should say, how I should introduce her, and I said I didn't want to come across as conceited because, today is her day. But she suggested that I, honor this day, September 11th. So I'm sure all of you remember where you were when you first heard about the attacks on the World Trade Centers. I know I do. And never in a million years would I have thought that, you know, however many years it's been since 2001, 13 years, that I would be standing here in law school telling you guys about my aunt who does the courtroom art down there. But here I am, and I guess soon off I will go to see these, see the detainees, and it's very wild. And I'm glad that you guys could take part in it. My aunt has been traveling to Guantanamo since 2006, and she's covered several trials and many hearings. She's got hundreds of drawings, and it's all really interesting stuff, and I'm glad that I can share it with you all tonight. I've followed it, you know, since she started going down, and it's always just been kind of a neat thing that I could relate to, but it's, you know, I guess the work will speak for itself. I highly suggest you come see the show. It's really nice. So I guess without further ado, here's my aunt.
Hello, everybody. It's nice to be here. Many thanks to the University of Richmond for creating this opportunity to share the work with you. And as Malcolm said, it was the same feeling I had when I was living in Brooklyn at the time that 9/11 occurred, 3 miles downwind from 9/11. At 8 in the morning, hearing that a plane had hit one of the towers and going on the roof to watch the whole thing unfold. So 5 years later, finding myself down in Guantanamo, which was our reaction to this event, and sketching the trials for the Associated Press, with whom I was working with at the time. So as a result, one trip turned into, I've lost count over the 8 years. So without further ado, I'm going to launch into the whole thing. On my left, you can see what looks like a burned paper, and that's exactly what it is. I'm across a river, and it just amazed me that the physics of this event blew 3-page documents and papers over a body of water to my doorstep. But on the right, you can see our reaction to that, which is the Freedom Towers rebuilt on that same spot. And I took that photo, and as it would happen, a solar flare occurred, and you can see 2 blue lights emanating. And that's the same symbolic thing that we project every year to show the Twin Towers. So it was just, for me, the evidence and our reaction to it, or the end and the beginning. So in order to get to Guantanamo, we get down there sometimes on a military plane, sometimes on a charter craft. So I'm showing you the experience of it. We sleep on an old runway in Quonset tents, the 6 beds to a tent. I sleep with the media, share in their reportage as a visual journalist, so you can kind of see what that looks like. We work out of a hangar, and you can see that in this panoramic photo. They've created sort of a press tent, a press operation building, and internet. Some of the journalists now stay in that press reporting so that they can tweet live what they see from the courtroom. And then we have these sort of informal press meetings with the defense lawyers right after, at the end of the day or during a break. And here you can see inside the building a press conference with the individuals involved at that certain trial at the time. This is what it's like inside, where the journalists are working. And there's Carol Rosenberg on the monitor. Carol Rosenberg is the single journalist who has gone to every event since 2001. 2002, I think, is when we first had Camp X-Ray. Miami Herald sent her down, and her editor said, I want you to cover this until the very end. And cover it she has. If you go to the Miami Herald's website, there you'll see every current thing happening. And she's just an amazing journalist, dogged journalist. And thanks to her, she keeps us informed as to, if you want to follow her Twitter, you can, it's almost like you're live, you're there yourself. You could see Michelle Shepard in the blue sweater. She covered the Omar Khadr trial, and Omar Khadr was a teenager when he was brought to Guantanamo and a Canadian citizen. So she was the person who actually encouraged me to put this into a book and a collection, which has resulted into getting the work out to the world. All right, this is the first courthouse through a cracked window. The first courthouse that I drew in, I actually was, as one would expect, in the same room with the procedure. But as you'll learn, that isn't the case with the 9/11 courthouse. This is the 9/11 courthouse. This is the only photograph we're allowed to take of Court 2, which is, you can see behind that barbed wire to the left, it looks like a storage shed, but it is in fact a SCIF, a secured facility, which was built, a portable courthouse. It was built specifically for the trials. This is, you can see these windows. Behind those windows is where I and anybody else observing sits. It's soundproof glass. We watch and listen with a 40-second delay to what's going on inside the courtroom. Also, in Guantanamo, it's a base. It's a base that has a McDonald's. It's a base that has a prison. Below you can see Camp X-Ray, now overgrown, and they make a point of having us photograph and show that it is in fact no longer a functional prison, but for 9 months it was, and it's hard to believe that we had conditions like that exist. Sometimes when I'm not in court, they'll take us on tours. And I've learned that it's important, even if I've been on a prison tour 6 times, to go again with my camera or iPhone or whatever I have. And in this case, we went to see where the Muslims live, the Chinese Muslims who are known as the Uyghurs. The Uyghurs had been sent, turned in, who knows, they ended up there and there were no charges that could be held against them, but we couldn't send them back. Because if they went back to China, they probably wouldn't survive. So they were indefinitely detained, and they weren't allowed to speak to us, and they had art supplies. So in a clever move, they used their art supplies to give us a flip show. And in this case, they came out and started flipping their drawing pad, and words like, "We need to freedom," and "your injustice," were shown to the media. And within 24 hours, the world. And within a week, 6 of them were released elsewhere. So it was an effective display. The other thing I did to keep loose, to keep fast, was to keep a sketchbook outside of the courtroom. I did it for myself, never thinking these would go anywhere. But they did. They became an interesting visual record, and a less edited one, because the cameras cannot photograph anybody from the neck up. But for whatever reason, whether it's because I drew so loosely, I've been able to show detainees watching a soccer game, or views of outside of the courtroom that you don't always see in photographs. To the right, you can see what looks like a chair, and that is in fact a chair that they strap detainees that are hunger striking. They strap them in and they force feed them through a tube snaked down their throat with Ensure to keep them alive. And that was just a random sketch that became an important image. This is courtroom 1. This is inside. Oh, the reason I did this sketch They give art lessons to the detainees, and they were teaching them to draw a rose in sort of a Disney style, which felt surreal to me and ironic. So I did a sketch. This is me walking to courtroom. We can never go to the court without an escort. We also have to go through 2 security stations to get in the court and to get out the court. It's almost like boarding a plane twice. So I don't bring anything. I do bring the most rudimentary of tools with me when I go to sketch. You can see a folder under my arm and a kit. There's nothing to show. I have pre-sharpened everything because I can't bring any kind of blades or anything into the courtroom for obvious reasons. The first time I went, I wasn't allowed to draw faces either. The Geneva Conventions were the explanation that no unflattering image can be shown. So what would happen is I'd go and I'd draw, and after I was finished with the drawing, a Pentagon security officer would come up, Homeland Security, and review the work and sign off on it. So none of my sketches can go out without that review, nor can they be altered upon exiting the courtroom, other than if I erase or clean up. But there's no additive quality. In the case below, this detainee wanted to speak, but he wasn't going to be allowed to speak. So his attorney took the fifth and said, I'm not going to speak until he's allowed to speak. And the judge at the time was threatening her with rank. So they took a break, and when they came back, they did in fact allow him to speak, because the judge, who was an officer, didn't realize that rank wasn't supposed to play in a courtroom. There was lawyers and there was a judge. So this was one of the instances where they were sort of writing the law as it happened in the first showing. The second time I went down was only supposed to be a 3-day trip. So it was he was an Australian, and it was the first time anybody was going to see him in 5 years. He came out with this long hair that he said he grew out so that he could flip it over his eyes to sleep, because the lights never go out in their cell. But on a surprise move, he decided to plead guilty, and they said, well, we're going to stay here for 3 days. We're going to fly in officers from various factions of the military, and they're going to serve as a panel, a jury. So I was allowed to draw this panel, but blur their faces, so you can see that. And in this case, for the first time ever, draw the detainee's face. But what happened is I drew his face, and I was waiting to make sure that the officer was going to allow that. And my escort said, no, NPR is leaving the courtroom. Let her take that sketch down to the media. They're waiting. And I said, what? Wait a minute. What happened to this law of sign-off? And he said, it's okay, trust me. So down the drawing went, rolled up under her arm, and I went back to sketching. And the next thing I knew, there were 3 very large men standing in front of me in accusatory stances, saying, you've broken our rule, you've sent a sketch out of the face, it's gone out unsigned, and thankfully the whole gallery said, she was assured it was okay. And effectively what that did was it allowed me, because the horse was out of the barn, there was no backing it back in, it allowed me to draw faces from there on out. So when the next time we see this fellow, we see him with a haircut and a suit. And it was wonderful to be able to show that, to show what this person looked like. This is him, pleading guilty. And as it turned out, this series of sketches won an award with the Associated Press for the most impactful story of that week. It's called Beat of the Week. So it was an important visual. Then we moved to Omar Khadr, who was a teenager. His father raised him to be Al-Qaeda, sent him over to learn how to build bombs, road bombs. And he was captured on a battlefield where an army medic was killed by a grenade. And they thought he was dead, and they found him under rubble, and he was alive. And they realized they had something important because they also found a DVD that showed him learning to make bombs. So a trial rolled out over the course of probably 5 years. During that trial, there was an incident with this man on video who was known as Interrogator 1. But Interrogator 1 was a guard who had been court-martialed for shackling a detainee in such a way that he had a heart attack and passed away. So that's why he was given this anonymity. But he had come forth prior to that to one of the journalists and given his name in a story. So of course, the journalists being journalists, we can't say his name, but we can refer to this story, which they did, and which after that they were told they were not allowed to report in Guantanamo again. They were going to be banned. And they had to sue for the right to come back. And they won that suit, but it was the one time where Carol Rosenberg actually missed being able to cover an event while that was legally going on. This is one of the jobs as a court artist, is to capture everything you see as quickly as possible. Nobody's standing still for you, and whatever is being shown on a monitor is evidence, and it's important. And in this case, Omar Khadr is seen in this kind of night vision greenish video holding up a bomb he just learned to make. And you can see him reacting to that with his head in his hands. And so this was an important sort of emotional body language event as an artist that I wanted to capture, to bring back visually. This was a guard who has since been released from duty with PTSD. He feels regret. He had monster tattooed on himself for the way he treated the detainees when he was a guard. And he is testifying that he actually felt very sorry for Omar. He felt pity for him. And he was describing how they called him Beer Can Bob because the hole in his chest was big enough, or not beer can, chew can Bob, because you could fit a chew can through the hole in Omar's body at the time. So, you hear this kind of testimony, and you want to try to capture what he's saying by his physical movements and looks. This was an instance where I was able to move over behind the prosecution and get Omar his face. That's not something I have the luxury of doing in the 9/11 court, which I'll soon show you. But you can see that Omar's eye is damaged on the right. He can't see out of that eye from shrapnel. They were given, the jury was told that they could cap the sentence at 28 years, but they chose 40. He is now in Canada, as you can see, still sort of in illegal limbo. But the medic who died, his widow came to the courtroom, and Omar surprised everybody by standing up and apologizing to her for being a part of her loss. So it was a sad sort of nature or nurture situation down there. Next up was Salim Hamdan, who was Osama's bin Laden's driver. And I was brought into court and told I couldn't come into court and draw because there was somebody on the stand that didn't want to be drawn. So I actually drew him as the doors opened and closed while this person testified, sort of from memory. And then later the judge realized that I could be visually edited. So I was allowed to sit in the courtroom. And you can see on the right that the person on the witness stand is blurred out because he is a secret agent. This is so you can get a sense of what it's like. That's me standing up with the dashes, and you can see that at the very front, that's where Khalid Sheikh Mohammed sits. And Khalid Sheikh Mohammed claims to have masterminded the whole 9/11 terrorism attacks from A to Z. That's a direct quote. But when I got in there and drew him, oh, here's just a little signage reminding that we can have no binoculars or ocular enhancements. When I got in to draw KSM, he was about this big to me. And CNN said, you know, we want a big portrait of this guy. So I was standing up, and I had all my supplies stacked on you can see sort of this area here was where all my supplies were stacked. So that's why it's a big vacant space. So I quickly dashed out this drawing, not knowing how much time I was going to have at an arraignment. As you all know, an arraignment is a pretty generally quick process. So I did the drawing, wasn't sure how good it was, went on to do this one, where he stood up and started chanting. And you could see all that coloration around him, and that's because I had to cover up where he was sitting at the time, and then he stood up. But anyway, when it finished, they decided to take this drawing back and show Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. And I went back to pick up an eraser so I could clean up the other drawing, and I saw him holding it with a big frown, shaking his head and pointing, and I knew right away that he was not liking that sketch. So lo and behold, I'm waiting, and they come out and they're shaking their heads, and they said, you cannot take this drawing back with you. We're going to hold it on premises. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed has asked that you go print his FBI photo out, come back here with your pastels and retouch it, and then we'll allow it to move. So I did the walk of shame back to the media room with one drawing, and everybody's waiting with their cameras for that portrait. And when they found out that a detainee could, in fact, censor media, I suppose you could say, or art direct would be a better term, it became a secondary story, which you can see Jon Stewart even lampooned it. So I went back through all that security with the printout, and with a halo of security directing me, I had to redraw this nose. Nope, make it a little shorter. I think his beard's just a little, that mustache is a little darker here. And so I went through that for about 20 minutes and emerged with that nose, the offending nose, buried under layers of pastel. And Wall Street Journal termed it the proboscis nose job or something. Anyway, so that became sort of a story in itself. So moving forward, you can see over time now, one of the jobs for me is to also show sort of edited views. So I'm looking at this through that glass, and I'm honing in and skewing perspectives so you can see the 5 men, and you can see by now Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's beard is dyed red for whatever religious reasons, and he's also won the right to wear camo. You can see that the soldiers standing against the wall, the troops, are very loosely indicated because I'm not allowed to draw them for security reasons. But I did want to make sure that they were shown. You know, they're part of this unique court environment. The judge is, he just handed over the USS Cole bombing, but he was sitting on both 9/11 and USS Cole trials. They're both death penalty, so that makes them much more complex. They've flown in learned counsel for these. So one of the issues that I had, as I've mentioned to you earlier, is not being able to see the full-on faces of these detainees. So I did a whole presentation showing them the Cotter sketches and pointing out that this is one of the biggest legal trials we'll have in our generation or our century, possibly, and that, you know, you should give whoever, whether it's me or any artist, the best view possible. So I did a little scenario, a little presentation, and what I won instead was the right to go to the old courtroom where they had split-screen monitors set up, pointing statically at each detainee, at the witness stand, at the judge, and whoever was speaking, addressing the judge at the time. It's not exactly ideal for me to go to a separate building when I've flown all the way there for a live and drawing it from a 40-second delay, but it's the only way I can get these drawings. And that's what I get. I mean, so anytime you see a sketch from Guantanamo and it's the face that you're seeing in this kind of position, it's being drawn from a different building, from a split-screen monitor. You know, it's the best that they can do at this time. The New York Times did write up an op-ed piece about hoping that I could get the clearance to get the ability to sit in the actual space. But anyway, during trial, they do allow them to pray during a break. So they bring their prayer rugs and they face Mecca, and they do a whole, whole prayer ritual. And so I make a point of staying there during breaks, staying there after trial, because this is more visual, important information, even if it's not during actual court time. I also make a point of sitting by the families, or requesting to be near the families that come down, people who have lost loved ones during the attacks. You see a stewardess in her uniform, and I had to make a formal request to be able to see it from their perspective, just to show what they're seeing, you know, while they're watching it. And I thought that would be a powerful image. So I'm constantly, as an artist, trying to think of ways to not just be a static observer, but to be an active observer and bring as much home to the viewer as possible. And sometimes I can hone in, you know, and do my best to get just what is happening with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. The graphic of the flags was a powerful visual, and also see this little fellow behind, that's the security officer. The same man who signs off my drawings has the ability to press a button. So we're hearing everything at 40-second delay, but even so, he's got to erase that from the transcript or from the recording. So he presses a button and white noise happens. So I could be saying something about psychotropic drugs that my detainee and my client is taking, and they're going to white noise that. What we found out during one trial was that he wasn't the only one that had a button to press. It turned out that apparently the CIA was in a whole separate location and had the ability to edit. Apparently we're told that's not the case anymore. So this is, you know, again, ever-changing. I'm trying to focus in on what's going to bring the story home, and often for the media and the world, they want to see the 3 or 5 men responsible for the attacks. They're lined up by severity of charges, with Khalid Sheikh being with the most charges. This was the most current drawing that I did. It was done in June, just a few months ago. So you can kind of see something that isn't even in a book or archived anywhere else. I take notes too, just to keep that. I also make a point when the families fly down. They come and they tell their stories about their loved ones, and they're often very moving stories. So I've started doing portraits and writing down exactly what they're saying about who they lost and how. In one case in particular, it was very moving when I heard a parent talk about getting his daughter back 3 different times. It's not, you know, that drives home that this was a terror attack and that they are constantly finding remains. How devastating, you know, that was to all of us, changing our world. This is a different perspective. And it's also a situation where the 5 accused could opt out. They only have to come in for the first day, and after that they can choose to watch what's going on from a separate room. But it was still important for me to show that they might not show up, but over 60 people do show up, prosecution and defense, and NGOs military, and media are all watching. So this is what it's like from the media's viewpoint. One of the cases that has been tried, and this is an indefinitely held detainee. He's being held in Camp 7, which we'll never see. It's a secret facility built just to hold the high-value detainees. He's the first case tried in Court 2, and he's being held. USS Coal Bomber, that'll be the first death penalty trial that will come into closure. They're planning on that going to trial next year, which I hope isn't too ambitious. Majid Khan, a 4-hour sit-in. This was one of the hurdles that I didn't expect to have to leap. But I went down there to draw this fellow who was Baltimore educated, and he had helped fund a terrorist attack in Jakarta where they bombed a Marriott. And he's taken a plea deal to lessen his sentence if he would testify in the 9/11 trial about some of the plots that KSM planned. And I think this is going to be one of the non-violent, non-torture evidence things that they'll be able to bring up in the 9/11 trials is Majid Khan's testimony. But anyway, when Majid Khan saw that I had been drawing him, that the drawings were going to go out, he told his attorney, I don't want those to move. So while I was waiting for the security officer to bring them back and with the signature, he came out and he said, you can't have those sketches. The detainee does not want them released. And I said, well, isn't that complete censorship of what's supposed to be a transparent trial? And he said, it doesn't matter. He's saying they can't move. I'm the security officer. I'm not going to release them. So I sat there for a minute and I said, well, I'm going to wait until his lawyers come out. And so I waited for 45 minutes and they came out and they said, you know, Majid's tired. He's hungry. Give him 24 hours. Maybe he'll change his mind. And I said, well, then 24 hours is too late. I really can't do that. I'm not going to wait. I'm sorry. I'm just going to sit here until you can bring something in black and white or in writing that shows that this is the fact. This is the case, that this can be done, that you can keep me from having my sketches. So I waited, and I said, well, you know what? Let me call down to the media center and get somebody to help me with this. So a commander came up, and with all the security guards working the internet, nobody could find anything in writing. And we're sitting or waiting. 4 hours go by, and finally, there's a knock on the door. The officer is called out. He comes back in, and he said, let me get you those drawings. And I said, well, what was the issue? Well, the issue was that there wasn't a protective order put out by the judge. The judge can put a protective order out, which means I can't draw something. In this case, I can't draw the jury. He's got a protective order on that, but he didn't have one on these. And I was assured that that would never happen again. So my passive Gandhi-like sit-in was effective. It was actually who I thought of. I thought, well, what would Gandhi do? What would Martin Luther King do? They certainly wouldn't swear. They wouldn't, pound their fist, which is really what I wanted to do, but didn't. And I'm glad I didn't. So that was how we learned about the protective order law anyway, and these sketches were released. You can see the one sketch to the right is very unfinished. Whenever I do a sketch, I do it in brown charcoal, and the reason for that is it becomes a foundation or a blueprint so that in case somebody moves or in case something happens, I can draw over it and you won't necessarily see it, but it also gives me an anchor if I've decided that that is the right viewpoint. But sometimes I run out of time, and in this case, that's what happened, and there's no enhancing it or adding to it without altering it after it's been approved, so it stayed like that. There was a new arraignment recently, Hadi al-Iraqi. So that is a new arraignment that happened on in June, on I believe the 16th or something So that's a new case under Obama, and it was kind of significant. I happened to be there, so I made a point of sketching it. This is sort of symbolic as to whether we're ever going to open or close Guantanamo. And ironically, believe it or not, a photograph like this wouldn't be illegal today. Rules often change. There's a photo in the exhibit, actually, that wouldn't be allowed now of the first courthouse with a building behind it, which is now not allowed to be photographed. Any lock, any border is no longer something that they'd like photographed. So, you know, that's indicative of the ever-changing situation we have. And that happens for me as an artist as well. But that is the end of my visual presentation. Thank you. And I believe we have like about 15 minutes. If I have any questions, I'd be happy to, if any of you. Sure, yes.
The proceedings, the attorneys representing the defendants, what language it was spoken,
Oh, yeah, sure.
where the attorneys came from, and those issues.
Sure, I've been asked about how the procedure, what language does this happen in? That's a great question. There are translators present. And so often you'll see detainees wearing headphones because they're listening to what the translator is live translating to them. And often they're being told, everybody's being told to speak slowly so that things can be translated to the Yemeni or Arabic or Muslim or whatever. So we provide a translation. And this also, what's interesting is this trial has two sets of court reporters, teams. There's a set that sits inside the courtroom itself, recording everything unedited. And then there's a set of court reporters that are recording the edited version for us. So that's one of the few situations we'll ever have where we'll have two sets of we'll have translators and court reporters. Well, that I don't know. The people who work, the translators, they remain anonymous to us as to their nationality. I think they're civilian contractors is what they're considered. So we're not allowed to name the librarian, the translators, photograph them, the doctors, anybody that's civilian contractor. So that I'm not sure about that, what country. Any other questions or, yes? Okay, the question is, how have I been affected psychologically from covering these as an artist and as a person? Thank you for that question. One of the things I was remiss in not telling you is my father was in the military, so he was an Air Force pilot, and so the first 14 years of my life, I grew up on bases. So when I landed in Guantanamo, the military purposely, just like a Target or a McDonald's or anything, they make bases very similar. So when you land on them or when you're moving, deploying to different places, you feel like you're at home. So when I landed in Guantanamo, I felt strangely familiar with it, even though I hadn't been there before. And I think it's also helped me to understand the mindset of the military when it comes to in situations like negotiating, getting my sketches released. But I also, as a civilian, lived through, the 9/11 attacks from the Brooklyn, the New York experience. So psychologically, it was very intimidating to come into a courtroom and draw somebody that could, a person who is a terrorist on that level of that magnitude. But what I decided to do, what I reminded myself that I needed to do, because it is a tremendous responsibility, is to do what a journalist would do and try to be as neutral and open as possible, and just consider myself to be a visual conduit, almost not an emotionless conduit, but as an honest a conduit as possible to record visually whatever I'm seeing, and try to set my emotions aside. So it's not to say that I'm not feeling emotional, but I'm doing my best to sort of be as neutral party as possible and let the picture tell the story and the journalists do the rest. So sometimes psychologically, when I'm listening to the family members talk, or seeing a detainee like Omar Khadr, I'm definitely thinking to myself, what father would send his son into a situation like that, but trying to not let that affect my professional presentation. So yeah, it's not always easy, but it's also a responsibility and something that's very gratifying for me as an artist to be able to use my abilities in such a way that make art into a historical document of sorts. So that's how I'm approaching it. I do have a book that I'll bring to the reception that has some documents that fell on my house from 9/11 and some photographs that you're more than welcome to look at. And I think those do bring home the physical manifestation of sorts of what those attacks were like. To actually see some papers that floated over 3 miles and survived. One of them is from Cantor Fitzgerald, survived that kind of impact when people didn't. It still stuns me, the physics of that. But anyway, thank you for that question. Is there any other questions at all that I can take? I would encourage any of you, though, you can view the procedure at Fort Meade. It is televised. So any of you, any civilian students, you don't have to go to Guantanamo to be able to see or hear what reporters are seeing on monitors. It is being shown in Fort Meade, which is relatively close by. So, go to the Military Commission's website and find out about that location and get clearance to go check it out. And, if any of you are curious from a legal standpoint, that's a great way to be exposed to it. It's edited, to be sure. It's not like going in person, but it is an opportunity to be able to see what's going on. So that's something for you to keep mind of. So, any other questions at all? Any of you? Sure, Abam. What was that? Whether I was qualified? Okay. So, how I ended up being in the position, the opportunity to sketch these. It's one of those situations where it's sort of right place, right time. Associated Press, I was working with them pretty regularly. They had sent me to a trial in Norwalk, Connecticut, the Martha Moxley murder case. I had a Kennedy relative. So I had sketched for them in a courtroom, and Guantanamo came up, and the art director at the time said, well, gosh, we'll send Janet down there. So I went thinking it would be one trip, and then covered it. And then it turned into 2 trips. And then the third time I thought was going to be the final time, but boy, now we're at the 8-year mark and over 27 trips. But I think because I'm so familiar with it, and it is such a, I know all the rules, and the irony here is that every 6 months we have a rotation of staff, of troops. The people that know the best of what's going on are the journalists and the lawyers, and the people who are minding us and handling us don't. They don't know. So often I'm telling my escort Now you need to make me wait until the security officer comes to sign off on the sketches. Okay, now I'm going to request to go to AV 134, which is where the monitors are. So we need to make sure that we have access to that security code to get into that room, and that it's not going to freak people out that I'm coming in, that building. So I think my familiarity has also been one of the reasons that I've been consistently attending. I mean, there's certainly there's a small pool of court artists. It's not a big, it's a smaller and smaller pool, but I think that's one of the main reasons that I'm continuing to go, and it's definitely been one of the most gratifying artistic experiences, like I've said, but having familiarity helps in an ever-changing environment like that. Is there any other questions? Sure. Oops, sorry. Yeah, thank you for that. The question is, how many days do I have? How long is this happening to do these sketches? Well, one day I did, it was an arraignment. The second arraignment for 9/11 lasted 13 hours. Any of you familiar with court, arraignments in federal court can be 15 minutes, typically, or an hour at the most. But they decided to read all the charges out, so it was 13 hours. So on that day, I did, I think, 13 or 14 drawings for that day. And a typical day that's a typical 8-hour court, I'll do between 4 and 6 drawings. That's the average. When I have a drawing is as long as the action is. So some drawings will be a 15-minute study. Some drawings I'll have the luxury of spending 1 or 2 hours on. But that's the time frame of, so when you're seeing those court art sketches and they're pretty loose, that's one of the reasons, because you don't always have that much time to flesh it out. And you're sketching sometimes from memory and are on the fly. So it's a really challenging situation. Plus you're editing out posts and people, and you're trying to hone in on just that thing that is happening at that moment that is telling the story. So the time factor is a very fluid and challenging part of a court artist's job. So, but it's during that day or that time that we're in court. So, how about, is there, sure. The volume of attendance is varied. It depends on what's happening at the time. Sometimes they don't have enough room for everybody, but a lot of times there's not a whole lot of people going to Fort Meade. And the same could be said for Guantanamo. I've gone down with 3 journalists, and I've gone down with 28 journalists to cover what's going on. So it really depends on what the issue is. When there was a problem with the smoke detector that was really a listening device, a lot of people wanted to come and hear what that was about. And that was when the attorneys were talking to their clients in what was supposed to be a private space, and they discovered smoke detectors were in fact listening devices. So this is one of the reasons that people are skeptical of what's going on, and it's unfortunate because I will say Brigadier General Mark Martins, who's the lead prosecuting attorney, is coming to speak here, and you'll see how hard he's working to make these legitimate, to make these airtight. And instances like that cast such a doubt and such a shadow over these commissions. It's just really unfortunate, but that's where the interest wanes and fades and ebbs and flows. So, but the actual coming in, there are only 7 people allowed into the viewing gallery from the media. So that's a limited access point within Gitmo itself. Yes, I have a question back there. Yes, I've been asked if I've ever felt psychologically like it's just too much to continue going back over and over again. Sometimes it is really hard to leave, my family for a week or 2 weeks, or if there's a trial going, it could be, I'm told the 9/11 trial could last months. Sometimes that's hard, but then people come up to me and they say, thank you for bringing this to us. I was worried that I would appear like a predatory, opportunistic, almost vulture-like presence to the family members that lost people. I thought, are they going to see me as somebody, trying to make a name for myself or trying to get glory by sketching these? And I was happy to realize that they didn't, in fact, see it that way. They came up and said how important it was to have these recorded. So when I've come to realize that, I would put aside any of my misgivings to continue to follow this, because I think it really is an important, questionable at times legal procedure, but I think it's really important to record it. And if I can be that person doing it visually, then I'll be that person for as long as it takes. So that's my commitment to it at this point. So anybody else have? I have to say that I'm really glad, though, that the university has made a point of giving me the opportunity to not only speak to you all, but it is interesting that it's bled into, journalism, art, history, and law. And I do hope that long after I'm gone, we can continue to educate our future generation about what's happening down there. And hopefully that this will be something that holds up. We'll see, legally, for you guys. It's going to be an interesting road to travel. They're hoping by the next year or two to have 9/11 on trial. But, watch the Miami Herald's website or keep track there, because you will know what's going on that way. So we're about at the end of our time. And I thank all of you for coming very much, and the university.